Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's episode of Financial Transformation Live. I feel like I've not done one of these sessions for a while. I don't actually think it's been that long, but it's great to have you all with me today. Now, if you are watching this live, well, thank you for joining. It's so exciting to see those voices onto the sessions. If you are joining us live, please say hello. In the comments, share and say good morning. It may be a different time zone for a few people. I know we've got some people joining us from all around the world, which is very exciting. And for those of you that don't know, obviously, I'm based in the UK, and ITAS are obviously UK stage partner. So let's get started then. Let's have a look. So today we are going to be talking about data strategy, and I'm just going to sort out my presentation screen. Bear with me 2 seconds. Wonderful. There we go. So today we're going to talk about building out your finance data strategy. So we're going to take the principles of what you should be thinking about when you're putting together a data strategy and actually applying it into the finance world. So a lot of this stuff is finance agnostic, if that makes sense. Doesn't apply just to finance. But I think one of the challenges we have with data strategies generally, and certainly when I go into organizations, is that ownership sits very much with IT to manage that data infrastructure. And actually, I think finance need to get hold of it and do more with it. So we're going to dig into the concepts that sit behind a good data strategy. I'm going to share some of my inspiration and things that I think about. And then we're going to think about how that applies to finance and what's involved. So we talk about why a data strategy is important and why it's so important for finance specifically. I'm going to talk about the two types of data strategy, or two ways you should think about your data strategy as we go through. We're going to talk about the components that make up a data strategy, questions you should be asking yourselves, and then starting about, if we get time, we're going to start on a bit about working on speed to insight. So that's probably a topic for a follow-up session. But again, we're going to cover as much as we can in the time we have together. So again, if you have questions, this is a live session. It's live for a reason. It's so that you can ask questions. If there was anything that you wanted to get out of today's session, then please pop your thoughts and comments in the chat. It's lovely to know that people are listening live and engaging with us, and also they inspire, if not this podcast and me, to go in a slightly different direction, but you also inspire future sessions as well. So anything I don't cover in today's podcast, I will follow up with and make sure I get answered. Okay, so for those of you who have not joined a Financial Transformation Live session before, then please say hello, introduce yourself. My name is Hannah Monroe. I'm the Managing Director and Transformation Leader at ITAS. So we are a financial transformation consultancy that specializes in Sage technologies. So we work with 50, with 200, and with Sage Intact. It's my personal speciality, but I do work across multiple products. But the one thing I will say is that everything we're sharing with you today is non-product specific, and it's purposely designed in that way. So whether you're working with Zero, whether you're working with a competitor product, I hasten to add, you can still use the concepts and the frameworks that we're going to be talking about. For my sins, I've been working with Sage for way longer than I want to admit. Let's just say it's over 10 years. I did start quite young, but I very much have always taken a transformation and change focused perspective on how we implement. So it's all about how we improve processes, data integration, which is where my fascination with data and data strategy has come from. So this is this is a passion area for me. So the last session we did was all about designing your finance systems architecture. And that is so critical. It's actually a key part of building a data strategy. So if you haven't watched last month's session, please do go back. It is available on demand. You can find the links to that on www.itassolutions.co.uk. Go to our resources section and click on Financial Transformation Live. If you are watching this live, Sophie will also pop those links into the chat as well. So she's always on top of those. So do keep an eye on that. If you haven't watched last month's session, please do go check that out as well. Okay. So, what are the signs that you need to evaluate your data strategy? So, some of the common signs are that the business is struggling to get access to the data it needs to make good decisions. If you're sitting in a budgeting meeting, in a board meeting, in a management meeting, and you are not able to get out the information that you need to make good decisions, then you need to take a step back and assess how you're managing your data and your information strategy. If data is sitting siloed within different areas, so within marketing, within sales, within finance, that is another sign that you need to reassess. Now, one of the most common conversations I have is weirdly is between sales and finance. So sales are going, well, hey, we've achieved this target, but finance are on this is, we've achieved this, and this is the value of the contracts we've generated, and finance have a different number. If you are getting different numbers between your teams and having different conversations, then your overarching data strategy needs to be evaluated. It's not just about finance and sales, obviously, or finance and marketing. It's also about sales and marketing. Are they speaking from the same hymn sheet, or is all the data connected, and is it working in a combined manner as well? And the reason for that is that you have to be able to trust the data. You have to be able to trust the information and the source that it's coming from. If two of you are sitting in the room, right, regardless of whether one of you is definitely right and the other one isn't, that difference in numbers means that you'll spend more time talking about the difference in numbers than you will do actually analyzing the what should we do next, what should we do with the information that we've been given. So it's really critical that a strong data strategy is really critical to effective decision making. And if you are entering information multiple times in multiple different systems, you not only need to watch my last session on integration and financial architecture, but you also need to use that as, think about that in conjunction with your overarching data strategy. Because again, you need to speed up the time you get to the end result or the end data. And that very often involves an integration strategy as well as a data strategy. Okay, so it'd be interesting to know if anyone listening has come across this, has experienced these issues. Love to hear your thoughts, share your experiences, good or bad. But again, any other signs, any other struggles that you've come across or seen in the past that has made you reevaluate what you're doing, be lovely to hear from you. I really like this concept of two types of data strategies, so offense and defense. So let's start with the defense. So your defense is all about being defensive with your data strategy. So it's making sure that you are profitable, obviously, making sure that you are following all of the legislative requirements. And I think actually I apologize in advance for anyone that's watching this live, the offense and the defense are the opposite way around. So I'm just going to go into that. So fundamentally, a defensive strategy is all about protecting the data that you have. So is it secure? Is it compliant? Is it correct? Right. So we're very much focused on the protection of that data. It's all about controlling the data that goes in. Is it validated? Is it correct? And it tends to have a single source of a truth. So it's all put into a data warehouse or something of the kind, and then held there, right? An offensive strategy is all about how you take that data out and do something with it. So how do you improve your competitive position using that data, your profitability? How do you think and think forward? So thinking more forecasting, more analytical, more sort of interpretation of the data. And how are you thinking about the anticipative or predictive analytics side of things? And it's all about how can you look at that data from different angles and in different ways to improve your position within the market. So it's very much the flexibility. And in order to make that work, what you very often have to do is connect data from different parts of the business. So different attributes that might sit on a customer will come from different areas. So it's all about putting numbers into context, and having that expanded architecture to support it. So, and one of the hardest things I think in finance is we tend to be so focused on the defensive. Is that information absolutely perfect? We don't think enough about the offense. So the one thing I want you all to think about is, how are you managing your offensive and defensive strategy? Like, how do you finding the balance? Because you need both that forward looking, that predictive, that that driver forwards piece versus this is looking back, this is exactly what happened, this is how it happened. So there's no good having one or the other. You need to balance out the strategy. There are some great ways to assess as well your data maturity module. So I like these two frameworks, and I've included links there. But just talking about how do you assess where you're at as a business, how do you kind of figure out where you're at on the data strategy maturity level? And there's some interesting reading, I think, for anyone that's sitting there. And you look across, like, what are the tools, what are the capabilities, what is the model that we're working on? All of those different areas. But fundamentally, right, and we are getting very heavy into data strategy here, but fundamentally, what I think about for if a good data strategy, what does good look like? It means you have a shared data set that is used and understood by all stakeholders within the business. So your department owners, they understand the data. They use the same definitions for your data across there. The information that you're providing is accurate and validated and is predictive. So it's looking forwards as well as looking backwards. The users across the business are enabled to use analysis tools. So I'm a big believer that analysis is not just the realms of your analytics team. I do believe that analytic capability and the ability to interact and develop reports should be spread across the business in as many users as possible and with as many individuals as possible. But I also understand that there can be a need for a dedicated analytics resource. So in my world, if you have both of those, you are winning. Yeah, I think the combination is really powerful. And that data is used to drive decisions across the organization. So you should be going into your management meetings, pulling up your data, your reporting, your dashboards, and working with that and working in an interactive way within your meetings to drive decisions. As you question, well, what does that mean for this type of customer? Can you get access to that information? And once you shift into that data-driven, dynamic business decisions approach, you all of a sudden have this amazing ability to respond faster to changes in the environment. We've talked a lot about volatility on the podcast, but it is so true. Data allows you to understand that volatility, to react better, and also to predict where possible what is going to happen next. So that is what we're looking for in a data strategy. And hopefully I've made it sound simple. I've made it sound achievable, but the reality is that there's a lot of work that goes into having that capability. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So sorts of questions you need to ask yourself as an organization, as an individual, as a team is, where does our data currently sit? What data are we accessing from other teams? What data are we holding? And where is it? And also thinking about what systems do we currently have in place to analyze the data that we're pulling? Can we use the same tool across all of the systems? Do we have to use different tools? What's the current capability? Thinking about, as finance, we need to think about, like, what are the current challenges with things like reconciliation? So there obviously needs to be those balances and checks. So we need to think about how do we reconcile, but we also need to think about how do we get the data into a reconciled format? So how do we get it into the end result versus then doing lots of journals and lots of processes at the end of it to get it where it needs to be? So how quickly can you pull together information for critical decision making? And you can think about the different levels within this. Does it take you weeks? Does it take you days? Does it take you hours? Is it instant? And where do you sit on that scale? Thinking about what reporting would, because a lot of the the bit that stops reporting being produced is actually an almost an organizational hold. It's saying, I know we can't get this information. So if you could remove all the barriers to getting access to information and insight, what would the business ask for? What kind of information would it want to pull? And does your data architecture currently support that? Thinking about accuracy. So how accurate is your data that you're looking at? And not just accuracy, but how consistent is your data? So, if you look at 1,000 records, is it all coded, in the same way? Is it using the same definitions for different fields? How much of it is free text? How much of it is actually analyzable? And then as a finance team and as a business, you need to ask you, what's the appetite for change? Do we know we need to change? Do we know why we need to change? And what are some of those conversations that you need to have? And again, I always like to start with these kind of questions, because then they start to make you think and go, okay, I know where we're at now, right? So the sorts of things that you should be going out and assessing. So what is your current landscape? So understanding where your data is stored, what locations it's stored within, and what tools that you have within each of those locations. Again, so some tools can go across different data sets. Others are very specific. So it's how do you need to understand sort of where your data is at. You need to understand the reporting tools that you have in terms of capabilities. And I would also add to that your users' ability to use those tools, because you can have the fanciest analytics tools. And I've seen this. I've gone into sites and they've got these amazing tools that are really, really powerful, but nobody knows how to use them. They're overly complex for the organization and their current maturity level. So picking the right and making sure they've got the right level of tools for both what you want now and over the next few years is really important. So assessing your reporting requirements. So sitting down with your stakeholders, your department heads, your board, your even just individuals within the different teams, your business partners, if you're lucky enough to have those kind of roles within the organization. So understanding the reporting requirements. Does each area of the business have a clear set of KPIs, clear sets of ways of assessing its performance? What about the non-KPI based reporting? What about the investigative and the predictive reporting? Ideally, what would you see there and be able to analyze down to allow you to look at that? And thirdly, and just as importantly, assessing the controls and validation. So where you have two data sets, so classic example is CRM, you've got customer records in both. How aligned are those customer records? Are you using the same fields? Are you using the same interpretation of the fields? Like address is a classic example. Is your address the billing address, and is theirs the registered address? All those kind of things. So getting a shared understanding of the fields that you're recording on the different data sets, what they look like, etc., is really important. And what are the validations that need to be in place? Because sales very much just want to get data in quickly, so they can focus on the conversations. But actually, for finance, we need to have good address data. That information matters. So understanding the validation levels at the different stages of the processes that your data is going through is super important. And aligning into your definitions of that is really. So this is the assess phase. So we're going in and we're finding where are the differences, where are the issues, where do we need to think about controls and processes. And then we move on to the next phase, which is the establish. So establish is you go in and you say, right, based on our reporting requirements, based on what our stakeholders are asking for, based on where we are looking to build the business, what does our data architecture look like? How is it structured? And where is it located? And what are the tools that we are going to use to pull data from? And the initial reaction from a lot of businesses is rush to we need a big analytics platform. And actually, for me, that's for some organizations, 100%, right? And we work with things like Power BI, etc. So I understand the need for it, but it shouldn't be the first answer. So very often within your current tool set, you will have reporting capabilities. Yep. So making the most out of what you've got is really, really important. But also, understanding, is it the right tool? So if it's a difficult to use tool, then it may not be the right answer. But if it's easy to use, can you build that capability? Can you build that ability, that knowledge in-house to take advantage of those tools and capabilities? So establish what is your ideal data architecture. You might want to say, this is going to be our data architecture for the next 18 to 24 months. From there, this is going to be the next phase of architecture, and this is what it's going to look like. And then we'll talk about how we get there. Establish an ideal data dictionary. So very often, especially if you've got siloed data sets, so data sets sitting in marketing, in sales, in finance, one of the pieces that you need to get hold of really, really quickly is where is the shared data? What definition are we using for those? Now, classic, if you're working in a SaaS company or a subscription-based company, is things like contract start date. Is that the date that the customer signs? Is it the date the customer that you deploy the software? Is it the date the customer goes live? So having those conversations and creating a consistent definition of each data field and a robust process around how you record that is really important. But it starts with the definition. Are you really clear on how and what data definitions that you're using? Have you and then you then need to establish your integration automation architecture, right? So I talked a little bit about layers last time. So that's something that you can think about. So things like, do you need a BPA, business process automation layer, to populate some of these capabilities and automations? But also, thinking about your integration. So how are you sharing data between sales and finance, or other areas of the business operations? How are you sharing stock levels back and forth? Reducing friction in gaining access to information stops people from creating their own versions of that information. So I cannot count the amount of businesses I've been into where somebody will have their own spreadsheet that they're maintaining and monitoring because they haven't been able to access the data source from another business or another department. So by opening up your data sets, by sharing that information, you are reducing friction, but you're also reducing the time spent trying to maintain different versions of the truth as well. And a great question. Thank you, Simon. So would love to hear more about how to establish data quality metrics. Absolutely. So you'll see that the last one on this is about establishing data validation requirements, including data quality metrics. So this is and can be individual to a business. So what that means is that you want to look at each of your data sets and evaluate that data set for data quality. So things like how well populated it is. So when you look at each of your objects, so if we just take, say, an opportunity in a sales, right, in the sales environment, you might say, right, of that opportunity, we have this many required fields. So of those required fields, all of those are populated, but of the rest of the data, sort of the non-mandatory fields, how well populated are those fields? So understanding, percentage population is really important. Doing assessments on validity is really important. So, validating things like addresses, etc. Understanding if you're, if when you're looking at addresses, what percentage of those have postcode, city, address, a city and county as well. So all of that information, needs to be assessed on an individual sort of object by object basis very often. So percentage complete is a good one. Percentage valid. So if you've got some kind of data assessment tool, things like address checkers, etc., that's also useful. But I tend to prioritize things that actually matter to the reporting and the process, right? So I'm a big believer in that if you embed good quality, validation as you go through a process, then you have to do less checking at the end of a process. So for instance, if when you go into creating an invoice, maybe that invoice is triggered for an opportunity in your CRM. If you've done the validation, the checks all the way throughout at different stages of the opportunity, when you come to press the button, that invoice generates automatically, which makes it really easy. And you've got some pre-existing validations. So that's one way you can do that. Very often what I will see is, and what I work with people on is things like dashboards that show percentage, things like percentage complete. So show me or build me a data quality dashboard that shows me all of the customers that don't have an industry, or all of the customers that where they haven't been updated in the last 12 months, because the likelihood is if that some of that data may be out of date. So you can use things like reports and dashboards to get a more dynamic approach to data quality metrics. And maybe that's a follow-up session that we can do on with some literal examples of the different finance data sets that we hold as well. And I talk a lot about customers, obviously, but the same applies to things like suppliers. So making sure you've got, and one of the top tips I will tell you is that when you're building out things like checklists for customers, so you might say, looking at this for each supplier, I want to say, do we have a contract in place? Do we have an ISO? Have we checked their ISO status, for instance? Rather than doing a tick box, you want to think about, is this something that needs to be reviewed regularly? So if so, you would put something like a date field in there. If it isn't something that needs to be reviewed regularly, then it's a drop down with a not discussed, it's assessed, etc. So a lot of people default to tick boxes, right? Tick boxes do not have any kind of date validation, and they don't have we've not had this conversation validation either. So you're thinking about even down to the types of fields you use is really important when you're defining your data architecture and your data dictionary. And again, thinking about the reports that you want to pull around your validity is really important. So I hope this is helping, guys, and loving the questions. I've had a few DMs as well, which is really useful. Implementation. So this again is kind of a big step, and I'm trying to cram an awful lot. So I would love to know whether you want us to dig more into some of these areas. We talked about data quality already, but so implementing. So one of the things you need to think about, like, you need to plan how you're going to get to your ideal architecture. And we've talked about this a lot, but don't feel like you have to do everything at once. So what is the process by what you're going to shift? And for each phase of that implementation, what are the key outcomes and objectives that you are going to achieve? So thinking about your implementation program, thinking about phasing, thinking about change management, think about processes, thinking about measuring the output of each of those. Plan your data quality improvement program. So I think one of the hardest things is everyone says they need to improve their data, that they need better data, they need more data faster. But what nobody actually goes in and does is an assessment of their current data. So, of our customers, what percentage of those have, they're what we call our core fields populated, fields that we don't need to do our invoicing, but we do need to do our analytics. So how have we assessed the completeness of our data set? How have we assessed the validity of that field population? And then pulling reports based on that. So building a set of data quality dashboards is a great step. And then what you can then work on is, how do you get your data into the format? So rather than maybe you've got core data is 80%, 90% complete, because that's what you need to actually process that record. Next set of, your next set of reporting, your reporting layer, what the additional information that you want, but you don't necessarily need, what percent, maybe that's sitting at 40%. Okay, so then you plan your improvement program about how you're going to get that data to where it's going to be. Planning out your analytics education, so building the skill set internally. So having a couple of super users, obviously, that go through the first wave, but then backing those super users up with educating and training individuals within your team. I do think every finance user should be able to work and use the reporting tools. At the very least, they should understand the reports that are available to them and should be working and how to tweak them, even if they're not building from scratch. And then on a regular basis, take a step back and go through this process again. So where do we need to be? Understanding our current position. Where do we want to be? What are the issues and the areas we need to go down? And then planning your implementation of the changes that you've identified. Okay. Take a deep breath. I am trying to keep these sessions under 45 minutes. I've been told that I can talk for a very long time. So that you'll notice that this session's a little shorter than some of the others, purely because last time I very badly ran over. So in terms of your top tips, so just some of the ways that if you go through this process and you follow all these areas, right, that here are some of the things that can really trip you up as you go through. So firstly, making sure you discuss integration before purchasing any apps. The amount of times I've gone in and to a setup and, sales have gone off and bought something. Somebody in finance has said, oh, we really need this to manage expenses, or the managing director's seen something and thought that's cool and has gone and bought it, right? Really, you need to have a centralized, approach to buying software, and it needs, the data and the integration strategy needs to be part of that conversation. For instance, if you're a project-orientated organization, somebody goes out and has been tasked a new graduate with going out and buying an expense app, but nobody's thought about the fact that it needs to be coded to a project and marked as billable. So thinking through those processes and when you're purchasing new software and actually thinking about how it's going to integrate into your wider data strategy. Making sure that you have understood reporting requirements, but not just the physical report that they want to produce, but almost understanding how they want to dig into data, and remembering that their ask will probably be limited to the tools that they currently have or have experienced, right? And so one of the hardest things is to take people out of their comfort zone, out of the reporting they're currently used to pulling, and saying, well, if I could open the doors to any reporting, how would that look to you as an organizer, as an individual? As an account manager, what sort of information would you love to have to enable better conversations with your customer? What sort of information would you want so that you can have better negotiations with your suppliers? So really digging into the almost like the underlying need of reporting, not the obvious, because again, if they know that they can't currently get it, they won't ask for it. And so it's really getting them to think that blue sky thinking, and that's hard, right? So sometimes you might need to prompt and think about ideas. Well, what if we could do this? Would this add value? What if we could do that? And that comes from speaking to your peers, speaking to other companies and organizations, speaking to your consultants about what they could do. When you're working on your finance data strategy or any data strategy, whether it's marketing, sales, or across business, you need a cross-departmental team to work on this. So understanding what sales and what department heads want from your data is super important to making this work. And also because they will then be enforcing some of the protocols that you will need to get this good data. So they will be the ones that having to have the conversation with the people that are entering purchase orders about how they need to enter data in order to make this work. Do think about how to embed data validation into all of your operational processes. The more embedded data validation you can get, i.e., checks and balances at different stages of the process, the better quality data you will end up with. If you leave it all to the end of a process, what you tend to have is a major bottleneck that slows everything down, and people get frustrated, and then you're slowing down the speed to insight. If you do it earlier on, as you go through a process, and using tools, like Clear Data, etc., that can assess and work through your data in your CRM, for instance, automatically pulling in addresses from Companies House, all that kind of stuff. The more sort of automatic data augmentation you put at earlier stages in the process, the more checks, balances, and validations you put in, the better the end result in terms of data. Do focus on flexibility and agility. I think when people hear the concept, when they hear data strategy, they instantly go to data quality. Data quality, that's the main thing we're talking about, but it is so much more than that. So what you want to make sure is you're finding the balance between control, quality, and validation and security, but also balancing that off with agility. So how can I twist and turn this data? What softer data that sits, in other systems can I enhance my current data set with? And make sure you have an onboarding program for any new employees, in terms of your analytics and your reporting and your data strategy. Yeah, so you do need to onboard people well once you've got this in place. But secondly, an ongoing evaluation and education program, both on the importance of data, the definitions of data and the validation of data, but also the reporting tools that are within your organization. Okay. So a lovely big list of things to think about. And I hope this has been useful. And actually, thank you for everyone that's been messaging me and sending me questions as well. I've actually got a load of food for follow-up sessions, which is fabulous. But if you've got anything else that you were hoping I was going to cover that I didn't quite get to in more, or didn't go into enough detail, please do feel free to DM me. Feel free to put it into the conversation. And I'm more than happy to jump on that. And again, if you've got any right now questions, send them through. We'll happily pick those up as well. For those of you that have joined us regularly, our next session is going to be on the 28th of September. We're actually going to do a rerun of one of our, I think it was about 12 months ago, how to assess your current finance system. So that one's going to be running because I am taking my summer holiday a little bit later this year. So we're taking a pause in September, but we're going to make sure we've got a rerun session for you to see and watch, and then obviously come back to hopefully some more questions, some more areas to cover, and then we'll build the next session off of that as well. So I'm really hoping you enjoyed today's session. I'm hoping it add value, and be really great to get any feedback that you have, good or bad. This is always a great way for me to improve on what we're doing. Please, constructive criticism is very much welcomed. So topics we covered is, why is the data strategy important, and what does a good data strategy enable for you as an organization? Understanding the two types of data strategy, i.e. offensive versus defensive. How to put together your own data strategy, how to assess, establish, and plan, how you're going to approach, and working on speed to insight. So some top tips on how to get to the end result faster. If you have any follow-up questions, any other topics you'd like me to cover, please do reach out. I genuinely hope this has been useful. For those that haven't been on our previous sessions, I did do one on integration. Now, integration is a key part of anyone's data strategy. If you haven't watched that system, that is available on YouTube, and I will ask Soph to pop that link in the chat. For those of you that are looking at the Sage, we're working on a Sage database guide for 250 and intact. So if you're interested, just send me a DM and I'll happily send it through once it's ready. Reporting tools in Sage Intact. We actually, for those of you that are looking at or are in Sage Intact, we actually did a session on reporting tools that are available. So one of the items on the assess is understanding your current reporting set and your current reporting tools. So please do check that out as well. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining me. I hope this has been useful. I've managed to stick to time, and actually a little bit early today. So thank you again for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this session and looking forward to the next one. Take care, guys. Speak soon.